Hi, everybody. Welcome into the Irish NFL show. Friday night, April the 30th, draft night two. After a very, 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 very late night last night. Welcome into all the boys. First of all, how's it going? That's good.
Oh, good. Refreshed. Delighted to have our guest on this evening. He's an immense storyteller, so I think this is going to be a good one and a lovely kind of change of pace from last night.
Brian, you're still awake.
I am, yeah, and took time out this afternoon to really get my head around, which was a highly entertaining night and a lot of surprises in terms of where players went within the 32. So I think we're all on board now in terms of who's gone where, and it's still an interesting few hours ahead with round 2 and 3 to come later on this evening.
Mark, as Brian said there, a bit like Jeremy Corbyn's meme, we're back and we're ready for it all over again. Big night ahead, 12 a.m. start. You ready for it?
Yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't Jeremy Corbyn. It was Jeremy Shockey. Was the Jeremy you can trust? Probably more so. We're back yet again, and in fairness, Michael, much as I love you guys, I'm seeing you more than my wife. And if it wasn't for our guest tonight, Mike Carlson, there is no chance I'd be on tonight with you. I would be catching up on some sleep at this point.
Absolutely. Well, let's bring him in. This is a guy that I fondly remember on my television screen when I was in university, late on a Sunday, Monday night, whenever. I can't even remember what it was now, but this guy got me into the game, so it's great to bring him on. He was on a show for me and Colin previously, but here he is, gentlemen. Mike Carlson, Iron Mike, the legend of the game over here. How's it going, man?
Yeah, it's going fine. I mean, I as I was telling you guys before, I didn't stay up to watch the draft. I really don't see much point in it anymore. It's like the world's worst senior prom combined with graduation, and Roger Goodell is like Principal Skinner combined with Johnny from The Price is Right. Tell them what they won, Roger. With the number says fit, you've got aloe vera Jackson from USC producing fine linemen since 1937. That kind of stuff. And, all these guys wearing suits for the first time. And, the networks have their prom queens out there in their ball gowns on the red carpet to interview the mothers. And, are you proud of him? And waiting for one mother to say, no. Wait till he gives me the money. Then I'll be proud of him. It's like... and the commercials and the nugget meisters all rushing to try to be the first ones to get information, and everybody, in a way it was kind of nice that Aaron Rodgers decided to be the NFL Hamlet and like steal the whole show from everybody. and I just thought that was just fascinating, because you literally had mouth clowns saying they had, the inside information and contradicting each other, within seconds of each other. He's going here. No, he's not. They're going to trade him. No, they're not.
That's why you have to just love Twitter as well, Mike. But Mike, before we even start off, and we usually ask our guests, especially if they're from the UK or America, whatever, if they have any Irish heritage or affinity to Ireland. I know. I mean, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I know you came over here a number of times to do shows for American football and stuff. What's your affinity to Ireland?
Well, there's no connection blood-wise, although I did call up many years ago when I decided it was time for me to get a British passport. The process was so off-putting and expensive that I called the Irish consulate in the embassy in London, and I asked if I could get an Irish passport. And the guy said, were your grandparents Irish? I said, nope. And he said, well, were your parents Irish? And I'm thinking to myself, now that would be a mean feat if they accomplished that. But I kept my mouth shut. And I said, no, they aren't either. He said, well, on what grounds, would you like an Irish passport? And I said, well, I've written a couple of books. He said, would I have heard of them? I said, no. He said, that won't work. And I said, well, I want to get an EU passport. And the British one is just really so expensive, and they're so unpleasant to me. I just thought, I'd be happy to pay like 500 quid for an Irish one. There's just silence on the other end. And the guy says, we don't work like that, sir. I said, well, maybe you should start. And then, of course, I don't know what it was, 7 years later or whatever, Brexit comes along, and now it's like a land office business going on for Irish passports. But otherwise, I did some high school games in Dublin. when I'm trying to remember the global football came over and staged a whole bunch of games around one of the college games. I did an NFL game in Dublin on Sky many years ago. The Broncos, if I remember right, and Bears. I think the Bears and someone. Steelers, maybe.
Bears and Steelers.
Yeah. Bears and Steelers.
97.
Yeah. When I worked for ABC, I did a number of events, the Irish Derby, a couple of McGuigan fights, in Dublin, Road Mile. We did a Road Mile in Dublin. And, I had briefly had a fling with this woman from Bray, but we won't go into that, because my girlfriend at the moment is from Limerick. So, that's my Irish connection now. I'm a big Limerick hurling fan, which I was before I met her, but that got me intensely into it. And her daughter, one of her daughters, is a huge Munster supporter, has a subscription. She's at university, she has a subscription and everything. So I do a lot of Off the Ball. I love those guys. It's one of the best radio sports shows I think anywhere in the English speaking world, mostly because A, they're so smart, and B, they cover so many different sports. It's a really great program. So I like it. I'm always happy to go there. Wish I could, but wish I could now. And of course, was it 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago we did a Super Bowl preview show live in a sports bar in Dublin, which was great fun. That was a bet. Can I say Betfair? Because they're based in Ireland, and I do a lot of stuff with them, podcasts and occasional appearances and columns and things like that. And those guys are great as well. It's really a pleasure. I think I wound up in the wrong country at one point. When if the plane had stopped in Dublin or at Shannon instead of Luxembourg, things might have been really different.
Mike, I think maybe you should chat to Jason Bell, given that he has Irish connections through his love interests. So maybe you could both head over and do an NFL special, and there might be a few others to come over at some point as well.
I think J Bell. She's a better selling point than J Bell. That's when we're going to get the crowd. It's not me or him. Certainly not me, not him either. I will point out though that J Bell and our colleges had the same number of guys drafted last night, which is 0. So Wesleyan's keeping up with UCLA. As I, it was a strange draft, wasn't it? Partly because we knew even less than we usually know, which is nothing. Going into the draft, we speculate, and everybody's got inside tips and stuff. But this time, apart from the first 2 picks being set in stone, and a few others being kind of obvious that if things broke well, that's the way they would work. I only published a mini draft of the first 15 places, which was horrible. But then I started getting these odd ones like Najee going to Pittsburgh. It's like, and whenever you get a late pick right, it's amazing, because it's like I had Darisaw in my first 15 going to Minnesota at pick 14, and he went to pick 23 when they traded down. And I'm saying I don't get that trade by the Jets. I keep calling him Aloe Vera Tucker. But I liked him a lot, and I thought he was a really good. But I assume the Jets are going to play him at guard and then eventually move him to tackle when they get out from under a couple of contracts. So that's why they wanted him, and they're probably right. He wouldn't have lasted to 23. But Minnesota were really lucky that people were making some kind of strange draft picks and letting Darisaw slip to them. And there are a couple of situations like that where sitting put. It's the Ozzie Newsome tactic. They generally let the draft come to them. Baltimore, and they generally do really well, and they did that again this year.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What did you think in terms of the 49ers taking Trey Lance rather than the other options that were available to them?
Yeah, now I love Trey Lance, but that was based on 2019. I'm actually a South Dakota State fan because my best friend, my film teacher, lives out there in her retirement. And I actually scouted South Dakota State a couple of years ago when I was out there visiting them with Nate. Watched one practice, and came away an expert on their team. But North Dakota State's a great team, and that team was really good. And I think you'll see a couple more guys drafted tomorrow from North Dakota State. I'm counting Jabril Cox from LSU on that because he was on that undefeated team and then transferred to LSU. And Baduns, he'll go, I think, tomorrow as well. But so I loved Lance, but then of course it's like when I do mock drafts, when I look at the draft, my problem is I always think, what would I do? And of course, I don't know anything. I don't know what's going on inside a team, how they evaluate players. And I learned this covering NFL Europe is, coaches evaluate players completely differently. One year I had Jim Kreiner not yelling at me, but criticizing me friendly in the elevator because I hadn't put Mike Lockwood on my all NFL Europe team for Pro Football Weekly. And I had put, the guy from Barcelona, Denver, Matt Lepsis at the tackle spot. And I said, well, Jim, I just thought he's a better, he played better. I like Lockwood, but, and Lepsis turned out he had some Pro Bowl years. He went to Denver, played really well. And Mike Lockwood couldn't make it in the NFL because he was 6'10" and he was a waist bender, basically, as they call it. And, that doesn't make me smarter than them. It just shows you that coaches look at guys differently. GMs do, scouts do, and you have no idea how they're evaluating any certain player, not just the ones up for the draft, but the ones on their own team. That you think they should be upgrading from. They're happy enough with a guy. He fits under their budget. So, in that sense, I enjoy people who try to do the mock based on what they think the teams will do, rather than like me generally doing as to what I would do in that situation. And my understanding from what I've listened to and got from various people whose opinions I sort of trust, it was that the Niners, when they made the trade, were probably set on Mac Jones. But then in that period, where usually what happens is that you over-evaluate in the other direction. Guys like Trey Lance would slip more. But the more they watched film and the more I think they changed their minds on that one, because certainly you didn't need to go up to 3 probably to get Mac Jones either. Now maybe it was they paid a lot to go up to number 3, and neither Jones, both Jones and Lance would probably have been available later than that. It's hard to say. You have to take the guy you go best. But I think Kyle Shanahan was probably the star, except for Aaron Rodgers, doing his Philip K. Dick imitation about what is reality. How do we know that it's not some alien? This whole NFL draft day process is not taking place on the fingernail of some alien from outer space.
You can't promise anyone will be alive, Mike, wasn't it?
That's right. That's right. But he did mention aliens, like we don't know if it's real. It's like this could all just be a construct of some alien beings. Or, you remember Animal House where the guy, oh man, can I buy some marijuana from you? He says to his college professor after he explains something similar to that. So they did a great job of hiding their intentions from the start, even the Jimmy Garoppolo business. But I don't see what the point of it was, particularly because they couldn't gain anything from people thinking or not thinking. Garoppolo lost an awful lot of his trade value in the process because they were obviously set on taking a quarterback. And he might have got a bit of it back because Lance is a likely candidate to sit for a while and let Jimmy play. And I'm not down on Garoppolo for his play. I still think that they should have won that Super Bowl against Kansas City, and even that last pass to Emmanuel Sanders. Sanders gets pushed in the back on that play. If he doesn't sort of stumble forward, he probably gets one more stride and gets to that ball. And Garoppolo had been knocked silly by Ben Neiman with no call on the helmet to helmet a couple of plays before that. So the problem with Garoppolo is that you can't trust him to get through a year. And I think for all the talk that New England would love to have him back, when Brady was suspended those first 4 games of the season a couple of years ago, Garoppolo only lasted the first 2 games, and then he got hurt. And Brissett had to come in and play. And so that, I think, is what more teams would be worrying about in terms of turning your team over to him than his necessarily bad play. And now, of course, with Mac Jones going all the way down to 15, I admire the people who actually mocked Mac Jones to the Patriots at 15, because I was saying to people, well done. I was saying to people, I thought Bill was unlikely to trade up more than a couple of spots. He wasn't going to get rid of all this capital, because the big theme with the Patriots this year has been all of a sudden they had a lot of cap space plus a lot of need at the same time, which they're not used to having. It hasn't really happened before. And he's patched his team together year by year. And finally just ran into last year ran into a brick wall where they couldn't really upgrade like they needed to. So this year he could go out and spend money on free agents. He still didn't go for the top guys. He probably overpaid for what would you call them?
Second level,
not blue chip, red chip players, more or less. But he made sure he got them. And now in the draft, he had enough picks to do some business. Goodell didn't take his first round pick away from him this year, for mumbling through too many interviews or whatever. And I didn't think they would throw away most of that draft capital, even though last year they did. They used extra picks to move up to get these 2 tight ends that didn't play all year. It was really, really strange in that sense. So I thought he would let the draft come to him in that sense. And I thought he'd have this, at 15 this year, you had the choice of some pretty good players, including a couple of guys who weren't. I mean, the next 3 guys who went in that draft were all guys I wasn't sure would get taken in the first round. 4 guys. I'm going down the list. 5 guys. So you had guys like Darisaw were there if you wanted him. Bateman, who I thought the Patriots might be interested in because he seemed to be a good fit for what they needed. Maybe a cornerback. Certainly Morig, who was, I think, the guy I was most surprised didn't go in the first round, the safety from TCU, who I think a couple of teams I was surprised didn't take him when he was available. So yeah, getting Mac Jones is probably a plus for them. And for all the criticism of Mac Jones, when you think about what his negatives are exactly the same negatives that Tom Brady had coming into the NFL. His positives are pretty much the same positives that Tom Brady had. Now, I think he's got to work on his arm strength, his physical strength, that kind of stuff. But processing, headiness, quick release, all that kind of stuff that they really value are exactly his strong points. So, more power to him. And I will say that I deliberately kept talking there because Kieran O'Connor from Betfair warned you guys not to let me talk or I would go on for 4 hours. So I figured my first answer would be at least 5 minutes long.
There's a comment, Mike, saying if Mike was a rapper, he'd be in his flow right now. So I think people are enjoying it. Don't worry. It's all good.
I don't think I can do them rhyming, Yeah. If you guys have been around long enough, one time on Channel 5, when I used to do the highlights on Monday night, they would give me these VHS tapes edited with each game edited down to about 1:15. And then I'd have to watch it on the VHS machine and hand write a script that I then read live when we did it. And one time it was the year the Ravens won the Super Bowl, And it was a game that they won like 12-7 or something like that. All the points came from Matt Stover field goals. And I was just thinking, someone said, like, when are the Ravens going to score a touchdown? I said, never. And then all of a sudden it came to me, nevermore, the Ravens. And I actually wrote a poem. I wrote a version of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven and did the minute 15 or whatever it was to that. And it worked out absolutely perfectly. For weeks over and over, just the toe of Matthew Stover, that kind of stuff. Those were the days.
Mike, a team that was picking just a couple of spots behind the Patriots was the Raiders, and Mike Mayock today seems to be the one general manager of all of them who's getting the most criticism because of the selection of Alex Leatherwood, who arguably was supposed to be being touted to go in the second or third round and not the first round. And if he was to go in the first round, it certainly wouldn't be in the middle of the board. It'd be very much towards the back end of it. So he said today as well he's going to be an immediate starter. So it's just a very strange selection for people.
Yeah, I mean, I agreed. There were guys I would have thought, if you want to tackle, would be preferable at that spot. I think part of his thinking is that Leatherwood can step right in and play right tackle, which would be his stronger suit. I don't think he's suited to be a left tackle in the NFL, and a lot of teams were projecting him as a guard anyway. And he's a brawling kind of blocker, which is what when we saw them. I keep going back to that game when we saw them at Wembley. And what Seattle did to them what they want to do to other teams, but it was exactly the same modus operandi. They want to be big and push you around and run the ball a lot. But hasn't that been Mayock's pattern as general manager? And I'm not convinced Mayock's the guy who makes the ultimate decision on this either. My biggest worry about that is that when you get a guy like Leatherwood who can play multiple positions and you give him to Tom Cable will spend the first year and a half of his career moving him around to multiple positions like he did in Seattle. When Seattle's line was absolutely terrible, Tom Cable's solution to that was not to get the best 5 guys and put them there. It was to get the best 5 guys and then play like a chessboard and move all 5 of them around so that nobody was in the same position for more than a couple of weeks. And this is what I would worry about more than anything. I know a lot of people who were Seattle fans were really down on Cable. And I met him once in NFL Europe training camp, and he was a great guy to talk to. He was really smart about line play. He was showing me lots of things, watching the drills that the guys had. But you couldn't argue with the results there. He's really had a tough time, and I wouldn't give him the opportunity to make those kind of decisions. With that line. Now, some of what they've done is Crosby's worked out. It seems at left tackle. Richie Incognito is kind of like the prototype of what they want. Just big road grader at guard. And Hudson's, when they have, that's what they want to do. So, but I'm just looking at who follows. I mean, well, I think the obvious guy is Darisaw, but Darisaw is going to be a left tackle. So they might have thought, well, we've got a left tackle. We need someone who's a little more versatile. But I don't know if Leatherwood's actually better than like Mayfield or Carmen or those kind of tackle / guard types on the scouting things. But he probably is.
Tevin Jenkins was one who didn't go in the first round that a lot of people thought he could have went around that.
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, they're picking early enough to still get a tackle. The guy I really like, and I'm not surprised he didn't go in the first round, but if teams are smart, I think he'll be one of the first guys who goes tonight, would be Creed Humphrey, the center in Oklahoma. And I think in a way, you're often better off taking a road-ready center or guard than, in Leatherwood's case, maybe the 6th or 7th best tackle in the draft. Now, it didn't suit Oakland. I think Oakland was kind of trapped in a little box where they knew what they wanted. And when people talk about rounds, one thing you always have to remember is that, first off, when they say he's a first-round player, second-round player, that doesn't mean much. It's like, is he a guy who will fill your need? And if you don't take him there, who's going to be on the board the next time the draft comes around to you? Assuming you don't. That means 46. Who's going to be around at 46 or 47? That's the dividing line. So maybe that's the way Mayock was thinking.
Yeah.
I mean, really want a guy who could be a stone left tackle, maybe move into guard.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike, Leatherwood might have still been there in the 5th round, in fairness. So maybe, like, the immediate reaction is maybe Darius Hayward-Bay, Jamarcus Russell, Leatherwood, another great first-round pick by the Raiders. But we'll see when they all get on the field, obviously. Michael, have I scared Mike off? No, he's back. Okay. He's back.
Yeah.
He's here. It's all good. Go on ahead, Mike.
I think I talked too much. The connection said, stop this. I can't listen to this anymore.
Mike, I was just saying that maybe Leatherwood might have been there in the 5th round, even like at that stage. So
I think that's kind of cruel. Plus, there is a secret codicil to the NFL Constitution that says you have to draft at least 6 Alabama players in every first round.
Well, they equaled the record last night with Miami in 2004 as 6 players in the 1st round. I actually, last night when we were doing our live draft show, I was calling hopefully Barrymore to go to Tampa Bay with the last pick to make 7, but didn't come out.
I was surprised he didn't go in the 1st round, to be honest, although, he was the best of what's not a hugely great bunch. Right. But I think he's got the potential to be a good NFL. But the interesting thing with Alabama is that in the last 2 drafts, they've had 4 wide receivers taken in the first 15 picks. I mean, 4 guys in 2 years, that's ridiculous.
And 3 quarterbacks as well, if you count Jalen Hurts still as qualifying.
Yeah.
As
well,
he transferred.
That was one of the themes last night, was the reunion picks. It's like, we're going to, Joe Burrow, we're going to pick him. Hurts gets in Alabama, Tua gets in Alabama, and Lawrence gets Etienne as his running back. It's like the college game is affected offenses so much that I think that they're looking at, if we keep these guys together, it'd be easier than coaching them into our system. We just let them. It's like, it'd be like the old days where the quarterback would, kind of say, go out 12 yards and do a hook. I'll find you.
Well, Mike, you're saying about the old days, and actually your Raven poem, I do remember, and I've used on our show once or twice, maybe quote the Raven nevermore, when the Ravens have stepped up on defense. And I do remember your lines about the New Jersey Giants as well, which never ceases to annoy Brian on this.
And the Newark Airport Jets.
Newark Airport Jets and everything. I mean, I always say, like, it's great that the Buffalo, the one New York team, are doing so well again. It's great for the state of New York, but I won't wind him up tonight. He's I'm going to be in good behavior.
Yeah, I also like calling them the New York Football Giants, but so does OC. OC
does that.
Yeah. I think it's cool. It of course, the baseball Giants haven't been there since 1958, so it's kind of redundant nowadays. But still,
they have to move to the other side of the country to get away. But Mike, I was going to ask you one quick question. You are the 2nd most famous tight end to come out of Wesleyan. There was another guy who came out of there who happened to play a bit of center as well. And the tight end position obviously has always been a fundamental difference maker. Like, you can go, your famous tight ends, recent and in the past, but you have to go back to 1972 to have a tight end drafted in the top 5. You have to go back to the days of Ditka and Kramer to have a tight end drafted at number 4. And last night we saw who's regarded maybe as the best pass catcher in the entire draft last night, Kyle Pitts, go at number 4. What are your thoughts on that?
I Atlanta had the choice between replacing Matt Ryan, protecting Matt Ryan, or giving Matt Ryan weapons. I kind of thought they might look at Chase as being the new Julio Jones, which I think he's quite close to being. I think that's a good comparison for him. But they can't get rid of Julio Jones, as far as I can imagine, because it would cost anybody too much money. They have to pay him. So Pitts makes great sense. He also makes great sense because Arthur Smith in Tennessee loved to play in 12 formation with two tight ends, and they've got Hayden Hurst already. So now you've got two guys who can, really create mismatch problems for defenses. Now I would say he's a willing blocker, kind of like I was, willing because you have to. And I mean, the dumbest thing Mike Senior Year coach, among the dumb things he did, one of them was to move me to a weak side blocking tight end, where the only reason I was playing my first 2 years was because I could catch the ball. And they didn't have anyone else who could catch the ball. And I was not a very good blocker, in all honesty. So leaving me there halfway through the season, I was averaging like 4 to 5 catches a game. And the last 4 games of the season, I had like a total of 7 catches or something, and probably only got thrown to 8 times. But this was one of his ways of punishing me. And so, I never had a boss who wouldn't steal the bass drum from his own brass band kind of theory. But Pitts, I don't know how much tight end, they're going to line him up, I suppose. But the guy he reminds me of is a much more athletic, explosive version of Aaron Hernandez. And I think he'll be used in much the same way. And they have, if I remember right, Lee Smith is the other tight end on the roster. Lee Smith's just a tackle. Lee Smith's like a big blocking guy. So they can run doubles with him, as well as hers. They can run 3 tight ends, and, really drive teams crazy. And I think you'll see Pitts playing a lot of wide receiver. The difference, he's much bigger, but the difference between him and like Plexico Burress in terms of playing, he's a better wide receiver, I think, than Plexico was. And he can do all the same things. So yeah, it's a good, I like the pick by Atlanta because, he's a once in a generation kind of player. And they, and so if you can fit him into what you want to do, I think that's worth taking.
Mike, you were saying at the start of the show just about your thoughts on the first night of the draft. Obviously, you had a lovely sleep last night, whereas I have been dying all day of tiredness and I'm on my 5th coffee. Do you prefer the second night, or were you just talking, in general, or do you prefer the second and third rounds?
Well, I think tomorrow's the most interesting day. And tomorrow I think you're going to see quite a bit of action. I like the late rounds, especially back in the old days when I was, really working hard trying to prepare for NFL Europe kind of, and, you'd be looking at guys who might get drafted or signed undrafted and sent to Europe. And I really like undrafted guys in general, because once you've been exposed to that and how hard it is to crack a roster and, how hard these guys work to do it, you really appreciate it. But I mean, this year's unusual because I think the way the draft stacked up was the break came quite early. I mean, maybe around 12, 13. And then you get this huge pyramid of guys who aren't all these edge rushers. There's no outstanding edge rusher on the team. And most of the guys drafted yesterday are defensive ends, and they're going to have to play like that. But there was a group of them who were almost indistinguishable. Some strengths, some weaknesses, and where they went. There's a couple of them left in round 2. There's some good safeties left in round 2. I think the best running back in the draft is still available.
Oh no, have we lost Mike again? Now, to be fair to Mike, the last time this happened, he came straight back in. So hopefully he does come back
They're
in
not
just
the
a wee
five
second.
best
We'll see.
players in the draft, but quarterbacks are
Yes.
an important position. They become the most important.
Here we go. Here we go. Mike, something happens and you just literally come straight back in. You're here. Go on ahead. Sorry, go on ahead.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the way quarterbacks affect the draft. If you don't need a quarterback, you've got a whole lot more freedom. And as you watch the other teams position themselves to go for quarterbacks, you see better players, quote unquote, falling down. I mean, I thought Sewell was the best player in the draft. If I had to take one player and say this guy's going to have a long NFL career and do really well, it would be Penei Sewell. And I just thought Cincinnati had to take him, but I understand why they didn't, because they think they're set at tackle, which they're not. I mean, Sewell's better than either tackle they have. And Joe Burrow, it's great he's got Chase to throw to, and Chase is, as I said, is a really great receiver. I think he'll be good, but I would rather have my quarterback standing on his 2 feet, throwing to the 5th best receiver in the draft, or the guys they have now. They've got a couple of good guys now. They don't need to go for the best, than have him lying on his back with a broken ankle or a bad knee after he's completed a pass to Chase. Especially when he spent half his rookie year on IR. And then, I didn't quite get, to be honest, is set at tackle. Again, not great. You can't argue that Sewell's not going to be better than what they've got, but they had much more pressing needs. I was really surprised that Detroit went for him, because I'm sure Carolina would have, we're sitting there kind of going, we're going to get Sewell, and that just didn't happen. And that turned out to be the thing that had the knock-on effect with, Dallas not getting a cornerback and being willing to trade down, and still coming up with Micah Parsons, who I think might have been the 2nd best player in the draft. The Giants lucked out, I think. I'm not sure why the Eagles traded up for Smith. I know why, because the Giants were going to take him. But why worry about that? It's like, do the Eagles really need a better version of Todd Pinkston again? Which is being cruel to him. He's a better receiver than Todd Pinkston was, but he looks like him. He's skinny. He's skinny as hell. If I'm like the Chargers, I'm watching all this happen, and Rashawn Slater's falling to me at 13. I'm saying, wow, So I woke up on the right side of the bed today. I just had to sit there, and I get the guy who would probably be the number 1 tackle in a lot of drafts in the last 5 or 6 years. So that's great for them.
Yeah, Mike, I the last time you were on with Michael and I think that the way you described the Chargers was a team that gets all the very big things right, but all of the small things wrong. That was before Justin Herbert arrived and they made the offseason moves and getting Slater. What your thoughts, I suppose, on the Chargers with their new new superstar at QB?
Well, Herbert last year. By the time the draft came around, I liked Herbert as well as Burrow, if not maybe better in some ways. And the reason I did was Jeff Schwartz was talking about the last 4 games or so of the Oregon season, because he went to Oregon, and said they let Herbert run. They had not let him run before that, only in emergencies and stuff. And Herbert can, as we saw, can run, can make time for himself. And he was a different kind of player. And watching those games, I saw, that he was right. And so it's a good quality to have on a not very good, or a team with a not very good offensive line, which was the Chargers. And, excuse me. Strangely enough, I just happened to find, while I was looking for an email, an old email, somehow it had gotten into a file. There was this old column I'd written for Henry, NFL Hank, when he was in London, and it was like a
Hollywood
preview.
Henry.
It was a preview of the Chargers season from about 2013 when AJ Smith was still the general manager, and the Chargers were just the same. I mean, it's the same thing every year. They on paper they looked like a great team, one of the best teams, and then everything would go wrong. The coaches would coach badly. They'd get key injuries. They'd mess up special teams. Nate Keating would, hit 35 field goals in a row, and then when it came down to the playoff game, he'd miss 3 in one game. That kind of stuff. And I don't know how that happens. I thought it was San Diego, and it went right back to Sid Gilman. It's just life's too nice in San Diego. You can't keep focused on football. So then they move up to Dominguez Hills, and I said, well, it's Dominguez Hills because there's only 18,000 people in the stadium, and it's suburb. There's nothing there. So they're in LA. They're the Jets to the Giants in the Meadowlands, and it's as if Everton shared the same stadium, and who would be the number 2 team, and Everton would be the 10, and no one would let them forget it, or Newms in West Ham, bunking in with or it's like Chelsea and Fulham, if Fulham were moving. But yeah, so the Chargers, it's a great pick. He's going to be a great player, I think, for them. They need help in the upper side. They need actually a lot of other help now too, and that's going to be a real challenge for them, I think. It's
Mike,
nice. It's nice they can get coaches who can, all they have to do is like walk across the hall to the other locker room and dump their stuff there.
Mike, I think the one set of supporters of all the teams today that seems to be celebrating the most is the Chicago Bears supporters. They're waxing lyrical over their new quarterback and potentially their franchise quarterback, which they are probably long overdue one. But
yeah.
He hasn't even taken a snap yet in the league, and some of the stuff that's going around on social media today is unbelievable. And I'm not trying to have a go at Bears fans. Don't get me wrong. I know a fair few Bears fans. I'm happy to see them get a quarterback. It's just it was a bit of a I wouldn't say it was a reach, but it was a big move in terms of going from 20 up to 12.
Yeah, and they paid a price for it, although not as huge as you might have expected, but next year's one, along with the middle round picks. Someone was saying that they hadn't had an all pro quarterback since 1950 when Johnny Lujack, and I didn't know Johnny Lujack was all pro in 1950. And I'm still wondering if that's the case. I didn't bother to check it because Lujack was terrible, not terrible, but because it was a different game. But George Halas ruined his shoulder, making him play defensive back, and he had a great year. He had one of the great passing years of the 1940s, and then was basically a run first quarterback after that. It was a scattershot, but I mean, certainly Sid Luckman is still the greatest quarterback. He could step into the Bears lineup right now. And play, he's certainly the best quarterback they've had. And it's because George Halas hated quarterbacks. He didn't know what to do with them. He made George Bland our linebacker. He traded him and then brought him back the next day so he could torture him more. It's Bobby Lane he got rid of. It's bizarre, but Fields is a divisive kind of guy, and I'm not sure why. I know some of the criticism directed at him during the draft process was being criticized because it was the same old kind of melanin-centric tropes about, not concentrating enough or not being dedicated enough, all that kind of stuff, which is part of the build guys up and then tear them down in the last month before the draft kind of thing. But I think in Chicago, his skill set will probably be useful, shall we say, on that team, because he's going into a team that's it's somewhat limited, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And he's got Allen Robinson, David
Mooney.
Montgomery is, underrated running back. I think it could be really good if he had a better line. But this was like, I think, the desperation gas for the current regime in charge in Chicago. And remember, they traded up for Mitch Trubisky as well, and that didn't work out. And I think Fields has probably about a 20-25% chance of being another Mitch Trubisky in this setup. It's analogous to the thing that the best quarterbacks go to the worst teams in general. Because they're the ones drafting first, and it's a bad situation to put a young quarterback into, to move in right away as a starter. And he might not start. It would probably be a smart thing if he didn't. I always think that's true. Andy Dalton can start for a while. They've still got Foles, although I suspect one of them will probably go before the season starts if they can get something for him. He's the kind of guy, if you watch the game against Clemson, he's the kind of guy who can make things happen out of not too much. And I think that's what the Bears need. Now, whether you can do that all the time, week in and week out, I'm not sure. But that's kind of what the Jets are thinking about with Zach Wilson as well. I think what they see in Zach Wilson is kind of a poor man's version of Mahomes. Who can get balls away, make things happen. And Wilson's got kind of the same rap as Trey Lance, in that his level of competition wasn't that great. But that's partly, your supporting cast is not that great at that level as well. So you're playing on an even keel to some extent. I mean, there are teams like North Dakota State has a number of games where they overpower their opposition because they're just that much better. But they play some other pretty tough 1AA teams that have good records of developing players and stuff like that. And, BYU's schedule wasn't supposed to be as bad as it was, but they had teams scheduled that opted out of the schedule, so they were forced to play a relatively easy game. Nobody really criticizes bigger colleges when they play cupcake games, or play, for all the hype that, like the big whatever it is these days, Big 12, Big 8. I think the Big 12 has 8 teams now. The Big 8 doesn't exist, but some of those are really one-sided all the time, and some of them there's no defense play. You criticizes. Patrick Mahomes could bring his team within 7 of Oklahoma, what was it, 62-55 or something like that. And that's great. I mean, that shows you a lot about a guy, and the Bears passed on him.
Yep. Mike, you mentioned the Bears, and not to dwell on them, but we had Adam Rank on the show before, and I shared the Jim McMahon quote where he said, the Packers were the best organization I ever worked for. The Bears are the where quarterbacks go to die. I don't know if he should die, but they go to, to lose, if you like. But the top 5 career passing leaders of the Bears reads like the Devil's Playlist within the 9th circle of hell in many ways. I mean, we're talking Mitch Trubisky is at number 5. You've got Jim McMahon and Jim Harbaugh in there, Sid Luckman, and right at the top of the charts, Bears fans, just in case you forgot, of course, is the wonder that is Jay Cutler. It's not exactly murderer's row of the 1930s Yankees, to say the least.
And Adam Gase made his whole career by getting that good year out of Jay Cutler, where he threw. He's the Gase specialty, of the 8-yard completion on third and 10. Sid Luckman was a great quarterback, no question about it. If you look at his stats.
Yeah.
And there's a guy called Mike Maximus did a book called the Quarterback Handbook or something like that. And what he did was he normalized the passer ratings for every year, and then listed the quarterbacks by their relation to the average. And you see guys, Luckman, Sayball, hugely above the average. And when you get into the modern era, guys who are like 20% better than the average are the best quarterbacks in the league. And that's always a good statistic. I think it's a curse from George Blanda on quarterbacks. Although I wonder what Aaron Rodgers would say about the McMahon quote. Because
I was going to say, Mike, Otto Graham in that arena as well, I think, went flying up the charts. But I do have one question to ask you, and I've got to ask it because I know the other two gentlemen on here are too kind to ask it, because we got two Broncos fans on. And you were mentioning about the draft falling to you, Mike. And obviously, and of course, if you already set a quarterback, that you can just pick the best available player. And of course, Denver obviously already has two quarterbacks who are equal leaders and they're able to take their franchise on to great things. So they had the luxury there at number 9, of course, of ignoring Justin Fields and ignoring Mac Jones and drafting yet another corner in the secondary. And I am being particularly provocative and trying to wind them up a little bit with that. But, how do you tell Denver fans to be able to sleep at night, basically, tonight, Mike?
To be honest, I like Teddy Bridgewater a lot. He's probably not the same guy he was when he was at Minnesota before he got hurt. And I'm not sure how you describe his year with Carolina last year. I mean, remember, he didn't have Christian McCaffrey for much of that year. So he was a lot of great weapons in that offense. And when he was playing in New Orleans, where they had enough weapons, he was not spectacular, but he was very, very efficient for that team. And they won whatever it was, 5-0 or 6-0 with him at quarterback. So I think he's the starter there. And yes, they could have gone out and taken a quarterback, or I was thinking they might wind up trading that pick to someone else who wanted to take a quarterback. Was probably the more likely scenario. Perhaps John Elway wasn't involved in selecting, making the Bridgewater trade, because what's his name from the Vikings is now the general manager,
George Payton.
And Elway's judgment of other quarterbacks has been questionable at best. The only decent quarterback he signed was Peyton Manning, who was literally on his last legs, and had one good season and then won the Super Bowl, and he had a season that was literally no better than Brock Osweiler's. So I think Bridgewater was enough of an upgrade to avoid having to take a quarterback. They've got a good set of weapons around them. They should be able to put together a good offense. And Vic Fangio getting Patrick Surtain is unfair in some ways. He's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. And I'm sure he's still heavily involved as head coach. The defense he built in Chicago has not been the same since he left, even though it was basically the same players. I liked Surtain the best of the cornerbacks, and I don't think there was a whole lot in it between him and Joe Horn and a perfectly healthy Caleb Farley. I think you're splitting hairs as to which guy you might want. Horn, if you like a really long guy who can play press coverage. Farley's another big guy, but he can play zone. And Surtain, I think, just looks like he's already an NFL cornerback completely. Really, really great technique, plays really smart. So yeah, I think that's a great value pick there. And if I were a Denver fan, I would say I'd rather have improved my defense and have Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, not turning the ball over too much, and letting that offense work. I think they'll be surprised. People get all excited about rookie quarterbacks as if each one is going to be the savior of the franchise. And when you look at the last 5 quarterback drafts, I mean, one of them, the jury's still out, but basically you have 3 picks that you could call successful, and two that so far are not successful. You know, maybe Darnold turns it around in Carolina, but the previous one, you know, you had 2 picks, 2 guys out of 5 who were successful in what was it, 99, you know, and 3 who were legitimately just busts. So, you know, it really is a, you know, a crapshoot. And the draft itself is a crapshoot, because that transition, the projection of guys into the NFL is harder than ever, I think. You know, the college game and the NFL game vary by so much, and the NFL offenses are beginning. They're in the process of sort of amalgamating the college offenses, but a lot of what the NFL still run is unheard of in many college programs. You know, they just don't line up over, the quarterback doesn't line up over center. They don't run power in that kind of way. So it's like making they talk about receivers, and you know, you've seen it only in the last few years where receivers are not having that kind of transition period where they learn about reading a defense, you know, running option routes, you know, which teams like New England, most of their pass plays are all option routes. So you have to read the defense as well as Tom Brady did, and know that, you know, oh, this is what I'm seeing. It's a, you know, they're playing half cover 2, half cover 3. I'm going to have to break the seam here, and that's where Brady's going to throw the ball. And if you misread it, Brady's going to throw the ball there because he's read it right, and you're going to be somewhere else entirely. And that a lot of colleges don't do that. You watch college football, and you see them spreading the field, getting man coverage, and then the receivers simply use their physical ability to beat cornerbacks one-on-one. And it's you know, for them it's relatively easy. For the quarterback, it's a predetermined throw in most cases. He knows he's going to have the one-on-one, and his guy is going to win the battle 70-80% of the time, so the ball's going to go there. And that's, you know, it's hard to project that into the NFL. They really are different games.
Mike, I feel like we could, honestly, man, and it's a good thing. I feel like we could sit here at 6 a.m. and watch both next rounds of the draft and talk football. But like, I think for any of us, man, and I think for all of us guys, you know, a lot of us have grown up watching you on various different platforms, and for people maybe now that are only getting into the game, they've almost missed your analysis on TV. And I know myself, we definitely appreciate you coming on here talking some ball. But can you maybe tell people watching this and just people around our accounts maybe a bit about your Patreon and just what you do there?
Yeah. For many years, every Friday, I picked all of the NFL games for NFL UK. And then when they decided to stop that column, which had originally just been a continuation of my column in First Down, where I just write about once a week anything I wanted to write about. I decided I would take it to a subscription channel, which is Patreon. And the first year, I picked all the games, and according to PickWatch, I won. Me and AccuPick, or I'm trying to remember if it was the first year or the second year. But I literally was of all of the things they track in the States, they weren't tracking me for some reason. Oh, because it was a subscription site. The guy who runs the site didn't want to pay a subscription, and I didn't have a way of giving him it for free without, you know. Anyway, so anyway, I stopped doing that. Last year, I didn't pick all the games. I just wrote a column on Friday about whatever I wanted to do. As it happened, I had my best ever year picking, because I still would pick the games on Sundays, and people would say, "Oh, you're just making that up because you can check." And well, I went on Nat's Talk Sport show 3 times, and each time they asked me to pick the early games. With Nat was picking, and the producer was picking, whoever the other guest was picking, and I would pick them. So that's 3 times the early games on Sundays, and I was 22-2 for those 3 times. So I said, "Look, I'm on a streak here. You know, for some reason, if you wait till Sunday, it's a whole lot easier than picking on Fridays. You know, and the pressure's off because I wasn't telling anyone about it except afterwards, so I didn't have to worry. So anyway, what I do on it is I keep saying at the end of the season I'm not going to do it again because I don't have enough subscribers and it's a lot of work. I wrote 5,000 some odd words today about the first round of the draft and put that up. You go to patreon.com. It's Mike Carlson, FMTE, for Friday Morning Tight End, which was the original title of the NFL UK column. And, you know, I think next Friday will probably just be a wrap up of the whole draft and all. But you know, I respect what guys like Peter King do at, in the days when he used to write on the Mondays. And I know that he wrote most of it before Monday, but you know, 5,000-6,000 words is a lot of writing. You know, if you did that every day, you'd have a novel. You could have a novel. Which I keep saying to myself, why the hell aren't you doing that? You know, but that's kind of the thing I do to keep me busy. You know, hopefully next year, I occasionally Nat still does a podcast for the Worldwide Leader. And during the season, I tend to go on that. Not so much in the off season, but I'm doing one next Thursday with him on that, and then you know, hopefully TalkSport will let me in the building once or twice again next year. It's I don't know what it is. As I get older, I just seem maybe to rub some people the wrong way. I don't know. I never worried about that before because, I mean, for years and years, we did, I mean, that show we did on Channel 5 and then it went to Channel 4 and it had a different, then it went to a different production company on Channel 4. And then I started doing the BBC for the playoffs because they weren't doing playoffs and stuff. And I think I'm the easiest guy in the world to work with. I don't always dominate conversations like this. I can actually keep things to like 20-second answers and then wait for the next question from the time when you have to do that. And I'm trying to think of where it was. Oh, I was doing the BBC World Service Weekend, which is a wonderful show. It's a 2-hour program and you talk about loads of things. They bring in news stories and feature stories and stuff like that. And I do it about once a year. Because they don't want to make you stale. But we were doing it remotely. We're usually in a studio in London. We were doing it remotely. And when you tell me, if you ask me a question and let me go on, I go on. I could do that. But I kept saying to the producer, if you want me out, just tell me, just talk in my ear. And he said, I said, count me out, say you got to be out in 10, tell me, and I'll finish whatever I'm saying in 10. I've been doing this for a long time. And he said, well, don't you get bothered by it? I said, the only things you need, I've learned this very quickly. The only things you need to do commentary, water, information, and the ability to talk while someone's screaming in your ear. Without showing that they're screaming in your ear, which I remember doing once at Sky when Peter Hussey was yelling. Because I said result, I think, when it was a halftime score. And, that was like sacrosanct. And Peter screamed from the controls of my ear, it's not a result. And when I watched the show, you could see my head kind of going like that, twitching, because the pain inside my ears was intense. But I kept on talking. So, it's not rocket science. It beats working for a living. Although, sometimes it's not that great a living, but at my age, who cares?
Well, we appreciate the time you've given us, and definitely would encourage people to check out your Patreon page. It's not just the picks. When you were on with Michael and I previously, you've talked about Roquan Smith. I remember a few years ago what a good fit he was going to be. You told us about Mike Purcell and what a great pickup he'd be for the Broncos. So we can attest that you absolutely know your stuff, and we really truly appreciate you taking the time to talk to us through the first round. It's been really fascinating, and maybe we can have you on again in the lead up to the new season as a season preview.
Sure. You guys look so professional. You're gonna have to give me something for it. It's like a coffee mug or something.
We'll get you over
Email
for
us your address.
around the Guinness and Irish whiskies, Mike. We'll do it live in Dublin when the world gets back to normal.
That's you're speaking close to my heart there. There's always a market. There's always a market. Did you ever see the movie The Drop with James Gandolfini and Tom Hardy?
Tom Hardy,
There's a scene in there where he's a bartender and they've got these Lithuanian gangsters in there, and he makes the guy drink some Mickleton, and the guy, or maybe the guy asks for it, but he does this great little speech, about the meaning of whiskey in life and stuff like that. It's worth watching just for that. It was taken verbatim out of the novel or novella that he wrote, but it ends with this is good whiskey, or something like that. That'll work. Irish tea is good. Thompson's tea is good. Limerick hurley jerseys, that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm
Irish
not,
passports.
Yeah, it's like as Rick. This is my complaint about the British government right now. But you remember the scene in Casablanca where Ugadi, who stole the letter of transit and killed the German couriers, says to Rick, "You despise me, don't you, Rick?" Rick says, "If I thought about it, I probably would." And then he says, "I do a service for people. It's like if they went to Sydney Green Street, they pay much more." And Rick says, "It's not a chiseler I object to; it's a cut rate chiseler." And that's basically the British government right now.
Well, Mike, you mentioned Irish whiskey. I'll leave you with 2 quick points. I can't remember if it's in the drop, but the Gaelic for whiskey is Ishkabaha, which is literally water of life, is the translation of it, which is probably accurate. Yeah. And you keep mentioning hurling and Limerick hurling. There's a very bad Jason Statham film, which I forget the name of it. I bring it up, but he comes out with a blitz is what it's called. He comes out with a hurl. And the exact line he uses to 2 thugs who he promptly dispatches is, "This is a hurl from the Irish game of hurling. It's like a cross between hockey and murder," and beats the hell out of them. So,
whoever thought of giving Irishmen sticks,
yeah,
was a bad idea. Well, in Swedish, we say aquavit, which is the same thing, water of life. Eau de vie in French, it's a commonplace, and it's true. I may go downstairs and have a little bit of. I've got this Jameson that's stout. It's been aged in stout bottles. It's a little bit sweet, but it's not that.
We want pictures, Mike.
It's all good.
Pictures.
All good, as my grandfather would say. It's all good, some better.
Mike, definitely. I tell you what, it'd be great to get you on before the season starts again, and hopefully more than once.
Sure.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, man. Hope you keep safe, keep well, and we'll definitely have a few pints in Dublin at some point, man. Take care. Thank you very much.
I sure hope so. Yeah, enjoy tonight's draft. It'll be good.
Thanks, Mike.
All the best, man. All the best. Thank you, Mike. Guys. I'm just gonna say it. Yeah, the legendary Mike Carlson, boys. The legendary Mike Carlson, the guy that has done a lot for people getting into the sport here, UK, Ireland, done a lot. I mean, I'll be the first guy to say it. I sat up to 4:30 a.m. with maybe a 6-pack of beer and a Domino's on the floor and watched him and Nat Coombs talk. And yeah, great guy. Obviously, thanks to Trust for providing the equipment. We have a big show tomorrow night. We have a special guest. We have an Irish footballer who plays as a striker for Leinster Senior League side, Lucan United, Dave Mooney, coming on, Brian, at 10 o'clock tomorrow night. I'm so sorry. No?
News to me. Referring to the boy receiver Mooney and not any Dave Mooney. I actually do know Dave Mooney, funny enough. I can get him on if you wish.
Yeah, but we'll be on tomorrow night. There will be a few guests. Good crack this morning, boys. We got there. I've actually been in 4 counties today. Don't tell Micheál or Arlene if she still cares. And I'll see you tomorrow night. Enjoy the draft tonight. We will try and be on Twitter. See you tomorrow night, 10 p.m. It's long of a.
Thank you.
Good night and good luck.